If it's okay, I will start with a video message which President of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the current president, chairman, also President of Bosnia and Herzegovina, sent it to us, and we can just. It will be a couple of minutes, and I think that it's really important, like discussions that he's been showing.
Dame i gospodo, zadovoljstvo mi je što danas imam priliku da vam se obratim i da sa vama razmijenim mišljenja o tako važnoj temi kao što je multilateralizam po vrijeme pandemije COVID-19. Zdravstvena kriza izazvana ovom pandemijom, kakvoj naša generacija nije svjedočila, dodatno nas je uputilo na značaj i potrebu multilateralne saradnje. U proteklim mjesecima mogli smo vidjeti da virus ne poznaje granice, nacije, etničke, vjerske ili druge razlike. Niko nije pošteđen, svi smo bili pogođeni i mogli smo se efikasno odupirati samo ujedinjujući naše resurse i pravovremeno razmjenjujući iskustva i informacije. Ljudi širom svijeta prije svega su se mogli osloniti na svoje države, naravno, ali to zasigurno ne bi bilo dovoljno bez međusobne saradnje država kao i međunarodnih organizacija. Pandemija kroz koju prolazimo pokazuje značaj multilateralnih organizacija, najprije kada je u pitanju koordinacija epidemioloških mjera s ciljem zaštite zdravlja i sigurnosti ljudi, ali i ekonomske stabilnosti. U tom kontekstu posebnu ulogu bi trebalo da ima Svjetska zdravstvena organizacija kao bitan multilateralni faktor u koordinaciji zajedničkog zdravstvenog odgovora. Također, ogromnu, ako ne i ključnu ulogu imaju Međunarodni monetarni fond i Svjetska banka, kao i druge međunarodne i regionalne organizacije, čija je uloga izuzetno važna u suzbijanju ekonomskih posljedica pandemije. Kao predsjedavajući predsjedništva Bosne i Hercegovine dajem punu podršku pozivu generalnog sekretara Ujedinjenih nacija Antonija Gutereša za momentalni prekid svih neprijateljstava i oružanih sukoba. Od najveće je važnosti da svu svoju energiju zajednički usmjerimo na borbu protiv pandemije. Ona treba da bude naš jedini neprijatelj. Dajem punu podršku također i globalnom humanitarnom planu UN-a za odgovor na COVID-19, kao i odluci generalnog sekretara UN-a u uspostavljanju fonda za oporavak zemalja sa niskim i srednjim ekonomskim prihodima od posljedica pandemije. Također, dajem punu podršku i zajedničkim multilateralnim aktivnostima s ciljem da svi imaju pristup vakcini i terapiji kada to bude moguće. Pravedna i fair distribucija će biti jedan od ključnih elemenata u uspješnoj borbi protiv ove pošasti. Zato terapija i vakcina, kada budu dostupne, trebaju da dobiju status svjetskog javnog dobra. Ova kriza je pokazala i koliku važnost imaju pravovremene i tačne informacije. Lažne informacije mogu dovesti u opasnost ljudske živote, te predstavljaju jednu od najvećih prepreka efikasnom javnom odgovoru na pandemiju. U tom smislu, nezavisni i odgovorni mediji predstavljaju neizostavan uslov za ovu borbu, a multilateralne organizacije imaju izuzetan značaj kada je u pitanju zaštita takvih medija. Želim da istaknem i naročitu ulogu organizacija poput Međunarodnog centra Nizami Ganđari, koji pokazuje naročito umijeće u povezivanju ljudi i regiona, bilo da je riječ o dugoročnim pitanjima poput klimatskih promjena ili u vanrednim situacijama kakva je ova pandemija. S tim u vezi, želim skrenuti posebnu pažnju na pomoć koju je Nizami Ganđari centar uputio zdravstvenim institucijama i ljekarima u Bosni i Hercegovini u najtežim danima borbe protiv pandemije. Koristim ovu priliku da iskažem zahvalnost na toj vrlo korisnoj pomoći. Na kraju, dopustite mi da istaknem kako je u današnjem svijetu, koji je sve manje predvidiv, multilateralizam potrebniji nego ikad dosad, kao prirodna dopuna nacionalnih suvereniteta. Samo putem multilateralizma i njegovih instrumenata možemo postići napredak u izgradnji mira, sigurnosti, samoodrživog razvoja i poštivanja ljudskih prava, te u izgradnji harmoničnih odnosa između država baziranih na međunarodnom pravu i ravnopravnosti. Zahvaljujem.
Sorry, yeah. Now we can just start our meeting. Gary, now you are taking the floor to lead our session.
Thank you, Rovshan, and good morning to our distinguished panelists and to all those who are attending and listening in. I understand it's quite a large number. It's a great pleasure for me. I'm Gary Jacobs, President and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science. Some of you are old friends and colleagues. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time, and look forward to our discussions on this very important topic. As the chairman of the presidency, Mr. Zafirovich, said, these are really critical times, and he focused his remarks primarily on the pandemic, which is preoccupying all our attention today on an urgent basis. But I think we all realize that the pandemic is only part of the problem that humanity's groping with today. Some of the other challenges that we're facing are directly resulting or aggravated by the pandemic: rising levels of unemployment, certain strident nationalism, concern about immigration, the closing of borders, the breakdown in transportation and movement of people, aggravating the levels of inequality, certainly interfering with our efforts to address the Sustainable Development Goals. And on top of these things that have been severely aggravated in the last few months, we have the longer-term problems that have been growing with surprising intensity in recent years: the retreat from democracy, strident nationalism, the polarization of society, the loss of confidence in our leadership, our institutions at the international level, at the national level, our media, and of course, looming over all of it in the background, the growing threat of climate change. So we understand, I think, when we begin this discussion today, that we're dealing at a unique moment in history. And I'll be asking you and giving you an opportunity to reflect and share your views on that. This is not ordinary times, not just for the last 3 months. And yet at the same time, I think there's also a growing consensus that the problems we're having with our existing multilateral institutions is also reaching a peak level of intensity, an unusual level. We've had a long history of multilateralism. David Chikwaidze recently published a paper in the World Academy Journal, Cadmus, a brilliant tracing back of the growth and development of multilateralism over centuries. But I think we all come to the same conclusion that multilateralism itself has reached a crisis of sorts. And the main question we're going to be asking ourselves today is, why is that so? What are the causes of that? What are the potential remedies of that? And what are the players that can help contribute? What can we do to actually move forward from this situation? So we will be handling about 4 rounds of questions, and I would request our speakers to be brief so that we can hear from everyone who would like to contribute on each question. If some of you would prefer to go to a further question, I'd be happy to give you more time for them. But I would appreciate, because we have a big group, that we keep our each presentation as succinct as possible. The first question I'd like to ask is about the reason for the problems we're facing today. Is it that the pandemic and this, and of course I forgot very importantly the nuclear problem, which we thought was settled 30 years ago and is now resurfacing with greater intensity, too important to be left out. Is to what extent are the challenges facing the world today the result of weakness in our multilateral system, and to what extent are they the result of challenges, unprecedented challenges that are simply overburdening and going beyond what the multilateral system was ever envisioned or imagined that it would be capable of handling in the past? So I'd like to start with a question to David Chikvadze. On the article you wrote, David, because I thought it's so relevant to this conversation, you wrote that the organization, I'm talking about the UN and the multilateral, as an organization of member states is not working. We have to reinvent it. In what are the reasons why you think it's not working? What are the reasons why you think it needs to be reinvented? And again, how much do you think it's a result of the unique challenges we face, or how much do you think that the weaknesses in the system are contributing to our inability to handle those challenges? Please.
Thank you very much, Gary. I'd like to begin by apologizing for being slightly late. That slightly in Switzerland is already a crime, 2-3 minutes. I don't like to keep colleagues waiting, but I am technologically challenged. Thank you for your very high appraisal of my little piece. Look, let me answer your question in the most succinct and direct manner. If we go by what the organization was supposed to do, I think the only time the UN worked more or less as it was supposed to be was in the very late period of the late Soviet Union. The US and the Soviet Union worked together very well, and the entire Security Council machinery worked very well somewhere in the years 1990, 91. And this was the time of James Baker. I don't know if you remember, I wrote a little piece on his 90th birthday. That was diplomacy at its best. That was even when you knew that you had basically a Security Council that was ready to follow your lead, you still put in 37-hour day and night, flying around the world, etc., and made sure through diplomacy that the Security Council would vote. So you worked very hard at it, and that, to me, look, if we go back to the origins, 1945, we are lucky that the United Nations actually took off, because let's not forget all the problems that were in the background and were coming out of the woodwork in 45, 46, and finally the Fulton speech of March 1946, the Iron Curtain from Szczecin to Trieste, and there goes the neighborhood. And after that, until 1990-91, the UN basically was moribund, and the vetoes were thrown back and forth as they are now. The only difference was that back then the Security Council was still, at least we didn't refer to it as the P3 and the P2, which is what is happening now. And so the organization is an organization of member states. That's how it was created. The UN Secretariat is only one of the principal organs. Although the General Assembly is the biggest and the sort of primus inter pares, actually the 15-member Security Council calls the shots because of the veto power. So essentially, when observers and journalists talk about the UN did well here and the UN messed up here, unless we ask ourselves, which UN is this person talking about or writing about? We're never going to know the exact problem that is being identified. And just one more thing to add, okay? And the member states who created their organization 75 years ago, they stepped up to the plate and created an organization that was supposed to respond to the lay of the land at the time. 75, even 50 years down the road, 75 years down the road, the member states are not doing it. Instead, what they are doing is they are starving the organization of funds and making the bureaucracy reform itself. And all this is aimed at the United Nations Secretariat, just one of the principal organs. Whereas where the big bucks, the big duplication and gaspillage of funds is in the UN system is practically untouched. Let me finish there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very, very important observations. You pointed out to us that the UN itself, are we talking about the administrative or the secretariat part of it? Are we talking about the role of the member states who are the founders and real owners and drivers of the system? It's a very important distinction to be made. And as I understood you, you're also saying that the system was created with a different purpose at a different time. Therefore, we have to reconsider, do we have a system fit for purpose in the current times? Thank you very much for getting us off to an important start. I'd like to now ask Prime Minister Jan Fischer from Czechoslovakia, who was a prime minister from 2009 to 2010. Prime Minister Fischer, what do you feel about the fit between the multilateral system as we have today and the challenges that we face today? Is it that the challenges are so much greater than what we anticipated before? Is it that we have had a withdrawal of support from multilateralism, or is it simply that our problems have outgrown the type of institution we have and we need to be thinking of something different or in some ways very different than what we have today? Please, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very happy to be with this group of so prestigious people and speakers. Thanks for the floor. Just before I come to the role of multilateralism and current state of multilateralism, as I see it, just some very short, very brief remark on the current situation. We are facing the unprecedented phenomenon, which the epidemic of coronavirus brought, and that's classical black swan effect with unexpected, badly expected, with striking consequences, with a very bad consequences, with a lot of uncertainties, and bringing the question or reopening the questions that we put before the coronavirus. But now it's more urgent, and I think that more important. We are on the crossroad, no question about that, and we have to decide what we actually want and where the world will be, and this planet will be striding to towards global approach, global cooperation, global economy, or to national selfishness, to the isolation, protectionism, to the whether we resign on the caring for human rights, keeping on individual nations, on rule of law, keeping on, or do we stay blind? This is very important, and the question is, it was mentioned several times before, leaders and leadership. And the question is very often put down what kind of leaders we need currently and what kind of the, let's say, world order we need. That's a little bit false question anyway. So I don't know I know what I wish to leaders, the role they play, but the problem is that we have the leaders we have voted in our nations, in our societies. And that's the question, not what's going on with leaders. The question is what's going on with our societies, that we admit and that we can say yes to this kind of leaders, sometimes supporters of the protectionism, isolationism, narrow-minded persons, and so on and so forth. International order, another crossroad. What do we wish and what do we need? Do we actually wish to, let's say, destroy the current world order? And some politicians, very important politicians, I would say most important politicians and decisive politicians, actually say, okay, this is something which is retiring, which is retired, and it would be bad to replace it. I don't know by what, by the way. But what we need actually is to, let's say, improve the efficiency of the individual parts of the international order and the drivers of multilateralism. International organization to play the role much more efficiently, much more effectively, much more openly, much more transparent, with much more transparency. This is the important thing, not to destroy, but to improve the efficiency. As a former vice president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, where I served 10 years before, I know what I am talking about, how important it is to cooperate on the global level, not to play some economic wars or custom wars or something like that. The issue is how to proceed, because some very important issues are, let's say, a little bit suppressed by coronavirus event, climate change. It's now that what I'm hearing is rather silencing than hearing something. We have two very expensive things as coronavirus represents, and the decarbonization represents. There's an immense, let's say, amount of money that's have to be pumped into economies on international, national level. And it's the role of national organization as the drivers of to be at the head of this efforts, to say where we would like to stride to United Nations, European Union, OECD, and others, and international financial institutions. So, responding to our questions, there is no reason for someone, despite it's luring, attractive for some politicians. We cannot afford to destroy the current world order, the multilateralism, let's say, way of our life. Otherwise, that's the way to the hell, because we don't know what should be the replacement anyway. But more efficiency, more keeping on the let's say rules of the game, and responsibility underlined many times of the current politicians. I am not sure whether they are aware of this, of their role, and how the situation is serious. I don't know whether they are aware of the crossroads we are are facing. I don't know whether they can weigh the current challenges of current day, political, geopolitical, and economic.
Thank you. We will come back to this as to what we can do about it. You've raised a very important point, and that is, we were talking about the system itself and the role of the member states, but you've taken us to the level of the leadership And the fact that we seem to have what has been called a vacuum of leadership at the global level today, at the national level, of leaders who could help us. So, and that you even interestingly attributed to something about the society, the people who have been electing these people. So it looks like the problem or the solution is not a quick fix of an easy type. It seems to encompass everything from what's happening in the population, what's happening in nation states, what's happening to our multilateral institutions. We have to look at the big picture. Thank you. I would request, because we have some very interesting questions and very interesting speakers, I'd request you to be succinct as possible so we can go on with as many rounds of the discussion as possible. We're really just warming up to get to the heart of the matter now. Now I'd like to call on former president of the Mauritius from 2015 to 2018, Amina Gurib Bakim. Please share with us your thoughts on what is the real issue today. How much is it due to the absence of the right people at the leaders? How much is it due to some social turmoil in global society because of the rapid pace of global change, the speed of change, the complexity, the uncertainty? How much is it really due to the way our global institutions are managed and the support they're getting from nation states? These are some of the questions that have come up. Please.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you again to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for associating me with this very important discussion. I think the previous speakers have highlighted something which is fundamental, is that multilateral institutions are what institutions and countries and leaders make of them. And I think previous speakers have also mentioned that I think there is an agreement that the world order is already looking very wobbly. And I think it's been revealed more with the COVID-19, but I don't think we can put everything at the doorstep of the COVID-19. I think it started well before that. And as we have discussed, we have seen that, since the financial crisis in 2007-2009, this has fed populism and also the wariness of international institutions. And these often reflect, I think, the realities of decades ago, but not today. And we have seen that previous speakers have also mentioned the role of the Security Council. And in fact, everybody has been quite surprised when the Security Council did not take the COVID-19 as being the threat that it presented. In fact, there has been no resolution. In fact, at the level of the Security Council, I think there has been a lot of debate, a blame game going on, whether they should call it the Wuhan virus or COVID-19. These are the kind of discussions that have been going on at the level of these institutions. And so these institutions, as everybody has agreed, they're all rule-based. But I think some of the bigger powers, and here I speak as a small island state and smaller country, and we feel that these big powers are increasingly, they feel they are increasingly free to ignore the rules and the multilateral institutions. And I think one country that we have all looked up to take the leadership, we have seen that America, for example, has long complained about the cost of propping up the multilateral system. And they have fretted about what they refer to as the Gulliverization, being tied down by puny powers. And then when we saw what happened in 2003, when Britain and America decided to invade Iraq without a mandate from the Security Council. And then we saw much later with President Obama prioritizing nation building at home. And then we find that the architect of the system, which of course at the time the United States, now we have a leadership that is very happy to rack the ball at it. And we have seen also where multilateral organization and also the leaders we expected to lead, they are withdrawing from all the agreements. And we have seen, for example, how the United States have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement on climate change. And also we see how the nuclear deal with Iran is a threat. And so we have seen closer over the past couple of years, America's commitment to NATO. And recently we saw how he's moving troops out of Germany. So what is also happening is that all the organizations, like the World Trade Organization, we find that new judges have not been appointed to the appellate body. And institutions or, regional blocs like the European Union have been referred to as a foe. So all these are causing friction, and they are prompting, I think people are increasingly referring to the fact that America is abusing the exorbitant privilege of having the world's reserve currency and stimulating interest among allies. And this is what is prompting, I think, countries like China to challenge the predominance of the dollar. So all this is not looking good on the world stage. And this is where we, as smaller countries, we feel that these are institutions, these are organizations that should be leading, and they're not. And our future and our future on this planet is a threat, because we are missing out on this leadership from this organization, from this multilateral organization, from the leadership which has emerged out of the Second World War. And we feel that this leadership is not there. And of course, when we talk about leadership, I know we're going to talk about this later on, it impacts all the multilateral systems that the world has taken so long to build. And we feel that the future of these organizations are precisely at risk. And this is where I think we all have to come together as we emerge after the COVID, because it's very easy to put everything on the COVID. It's not. I think it's been going on for a while, and the COVID has only enhanced it, has revealed it, and I think at our loss, and we need to do something about that. We'll come back to this later on again.
I mean, thank you very much for, and excuse the interruption here. The timer wouldn't go off, so sorry for interrupting you with that. You've raised even further issues about the fact of the complexity of the situation we're facing, the amount of uncertainty that's involved with it. And it helps fill out the picture, because any simplistic view that we have the wrong people in the system or the wrong procedures, or it's simply a question of the leadership in a few nation states. This situation is much broader, and we have to try to understand it in its entirety. And I'd like to take one more answer to the first question, and then we'll go on to follow the train of this thought. And I'd like to ask President Ivo Josipovic, who's president of Croatia from 2010 to 2015. Ivo, share with us your views on what's going on. What's really at the root of the problem? You're still muted. Could you please unmute for us? Lower left-hand corner, it should be, of your screen.
Can you hear me now?
Now we hear.
Okay, so I think we are witnessing a very important historical moment, because now we are in one phases that humanity witnessed many times during the history, and that is the moment when a global social structure is being changed. Not only on micro level, that means in many countries we have very important changements. Not only local governing structures are changed, but philosophy of governing is changed, philosophy of social relations in specific countries very changed. Look at the United States, Hungary, Poland, even Croatia or some other countries. But also we are witnessing at global scene important changes of structure. We are now in the period when the new relations are being born, and that's very, very important. On a micro level, it's visible to question, do we need or do we want unilateralism, isolationism, or globalism, or multilateralism? This is for me very obvious that many important key players are pushing the world towards unilateralism and isolationism. It's the most visible in the case of United States. And the consequences are very important. Not only, I agree, not only Corona, migrations are guilty for that, but very deep social and political movement interacting each other, causing important changes on global political scene. Definitely it's visible through question of the role of international organizations. Definitely United Nations is the most important issue in that frame. Now it's visible with the World Health Organization and the relation between United States and this UN very important organization. And that's the second important question. Are we now changing position of international law? That's very important. Yes, we have international law, but do we obey it? That's very important. Do we obey it? And do we have a mechanism to enforce international law to make it efficient and capable to arrange relations between key players and states, of course, but the other key players as well? On a very basic political level, it's very important to answer: does principle United States first, or Croatia first, or Greece first, or any country first has limits? Are there any limits given by the world order, or there is no limit? We are going to sacrifice everything, every principle, to enforce our United States first or Croatia first. Of course, Croatia first is just literally example. On local level, it's basic question is: are we going to organize our societies as autocratic society or democracy? There are more and more states shifting to authority, from democracy to authoritarian system. That's very visible. And even in those countries in which democracy is still guiding principle, it's very visible that there is very strong tendency to promote or to improve more and more rigid and undemocratic political parties and leaders. For me, it's obvious, especially in Europe, because Europe was some kind of cradle of flourishing democracy for many people, but more and more, in more and more countries, we are shifting to completely different models. And there was important questions: what kind of leaders do we need? Unimportant. Why unimportant? Because this type of question is starting from very basic professor's mistake. I'm professor as well now. What does it mean? We project what would we like to have, and then we project what kind of leader should organize society we would like to see. But it's completely wrong. All this story is happening out of university classrooms. Completely out of university classrooms. And the leaders are going to improve themselves in spite of what do we professors think, what kind of leaders are needed. So the leaders are not introduced up to our wishes, but they are conquering political scene. And they conquer political scene because global societies change. That is the reason why periodically we have, in our history, we have decisive politicians of completely different political approach. So now I think that we are now in the period when the changement in society will really decide whether we are going to have new Hitler or new Mandela. And it's not up to professors, but it's up to global changements in our society on micro and global political scene. The role of course, political movements, because they are reflecting change in society, it's very important. But there is another very important key player, more important than in any previous period of human society. It's media. Media are now the most important political key key players, they are not reflecting society, they are modifying society. And that's very important because they are important powers, not always governed by democratic criteria. They are governed by the fact who is governing them, who is paying them. And definitely new technologies, especially internet, global internet, but the other media as well, are now key player in all these changes we have on global and local level. So what can we do? Yes, we are contributing by discussions, by our political opinion about society, but I'm a little bit afraid whether are we too late or not.
We'll come back to that, and I thank you for the issue of the media, because we'll also come back to that. It's a very important area you've raised. In fact, you've raised some very rich points for discussion. You know, the more I listen to all of you, it really looks like we are at a global identity crisis right now. We're at some kind of a transition. It more and more brings back to mind the fact that the multilateral institutions were really founded for a different purpose. They weren't founded to handle the complexity of the world and the multitude of factors and the role of global business and international global financial systems and so forth. In fact, the very nation of security on which the system was founded, it was really founded to avoid conflict between nation states. And as David mentioned in his very beautifully in his paper, largely it has been very successful in doing that compared to our history in the last century. So we may be evaluating it against norms and challenges and needs that simply were never what was conceived of at the time it was founded. And I think that's an important insight, not to underestimate the challenge we face or the need for change, but to realize that we have had a phenomenal amount of global cooperation in the last century. We're so far beyond where we were 100 years ago or 50 years ago in terms of multilateral cooperation, but the world keeps going. After 1990, we have a globalized society. We have a global social system called the internet. We have mobility of people and money and economy that was unimaginable just 30 years ago. We need new law. We have underlying changes in the structure, as Ivo said. So it helps us to paint a picture that whatever the remedy is going to be, it's not going to go back to tinkering with the existing. Now I'd like to ask Phoebe Kondari, a professor from Athens University of Economics and Business, also president of European AERE. Please tell me what that is, Phoebe. Co-chair.
The European Association of Environmental Resource Economies, consisting of more than 1,200 institutions and hundreds of thousands of members. It's a scientific association focusing on environmental economics.
Thank you. I should have known that before.
No, you shouldn't. I mean.
And I know you're, but this one I know. You're also co-chair of UNSDSN Athens, a very important network, and you can say something about that. But let me just ask you a question. On this issue of security, I'm postulating, and I think there's a validity in it, that the kind of security the UN was founded to address was really the security between, to defend nation states and minimize or eliminate conflict between nation states. But it seems to me that the kind of issues of security today are very different from that, or much more complex than that. And this is your field, so please tell us your thoughts.
Yes, it is much more complex than that. I'm working a lot on environmental economics and obviously climate change. And I will try to compare how we are handling the climate emergency and how we are handling COVID, and how well the multilateral institutions seem to be equipped to handle these two emergencies. From what I've seen, my assessment of the situation is that obviously the pandemic has proven that governments have the ability to take dramatic measures to mitigate an existential threat. Also, the society showed that it can adapt quite swiftly to new restricted lifestyles. The national states were better in responding in terms of explicit imminent response. And obviously the timing of this response was very important for saving lives. So I agree with the previous speakers that COVID, although it has shown that national states react quickly to an imminent response, it has also revealed the depth of global interdependence. So it has revealed that the world is only as resilient as the least resilient country or person in it. And COVID, as the previous speakers have identified, has made explicit the widespread social, economic, and environmental vulnerability. And we are really at the crossroads. Again, I repeat the other speakers. This is a moment of clarity. This is a moment where we need to think how we want to reboot our economies, our societies, our development. And I will claim that we need to do that towards people-centric, inclusive, rights-based, participatory, green development. And I will refer to Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. The SDGs are our global agenda for making our planet, our people, and our prosperity sustainable. At the moment, and according to the Global Economic World Bank report that was out in June 2020, the coronavirus shock will cause the deepest global recession since World War II. The global economy is expected to contract by 5.2%. And this is approximately 3 times the size of the great financial crisis. And it's important to look at what is happening, not just in Europe, not just in the US, not just in Brazil, India, but also to, what is happening with the emerging economies. Contrary to what has happened in the great financial recession, when many emerging economies, including China, endure the shock quite well, the current crisis is not only deep, but also widespread, with no economic or region being spared. So emerging economies have been severely hit by massive capital outflows, which makes their debt servicing almost impossible. And at the same time, no one is resilient enough to be explicitly able to help. The economic consequences are an elevation of uncertainty, a rise in unemployment, unprecedented, the decline in commodity prices, a sharp increase in the required risk premia. And all this has resulted in an immersive attempt, in a huge attempt to take monetary and fiscal measures in order to respond to this crisis. And in my next intervention, I'm gonna try to say that the response is very big, it is unprecedented, but we need to make it sustainable, rebuild better, and we need to show extra care for the most vulnerable. And I will close this intervention by saying that I believe it is increasing inequality and exclusion in the co-design of our future vision and pathways to this vision of significant members of the global society. Inequality and exclusion is what leads to bad leadership, loss in the power in the multilateral international organizations that we need more than ever. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Phoebe, and thank you for respecting the time. And I'm eager to hear your second intervention now. You have our interest totally up. And I think you've made a clear case that the very concept of security that we need, that the real threats to security now are very different than the threats on which our multilateral system was founded, and very different from the way we're investing our money on security today, and still where we're preoccupied at the national level of supporting it. And obviously, to refit to purpose global institutions to address the kind of issues you're talking about is a radical change from the orientation with which the institution was founded 75 years ago. So thank you. I'd now like to call on Alexander Likatol, former president of the Green Cross International, who's a colleague and somebody who's been thinking very deeply on these issues for many years. And I'd also like to mention has written a wonderful paper in our Cadmus journal last month and presented at the conference that we did with the United Nations in Geneva and in partnership with the Nizami Ganjavi International Center and the co-presidents who both participated. Alexander, tell us what type of multilateralism do you think we need to address the challenges that we're facing in this complex world? And is it different from what we have been striving for or using in the past?
Thank you very much, Gary. It's always a pleasure to be at the same panel with you and our friends, panelists, and you and newcomers. But I wanted just to react firstly to the statement that the qualities of the leaders are not for choice. Actually, I would agree to that. We do not choose, we do not cultivate the leaders, but I would say that still, by default, let me say, leadership and leaders come, and this process is determined by the same main economic law. Demand drives supply. And whether we need a transformation of leaders, they will appear. Whether we need a different kind oriented leaders, they will come. And that will be dependent upon the general condition and the world order and the kind of multilateralism we will have. Actually, I wanted just to say also, Gary, because we are talking all the time about crisis. And it seems to me that we are all talking about different crises. Multilateralism in crisis when it was not. You know, you said that starting from the United Nations creation, it didn't boast many success. But I would say that, sorry, League of Nations also did not, you know, and I would say that United Nations is a much better league, let me say, than League of Nations in terms of the achievement of multilateralism. Vienna Congress that remade Europe after the Napoleonic Wars was also not a very successful endeavor, let me say. So I would say multilateralism has never been an ideal, and nothing is ideal in politics. So what we're talking about, crisis of what? COVID, but COVID is not a man-made problem. We're talking maybe about lack of systemic cooperation, climate change looming on the horizon, growing number of conflicts. But as a historian, I may tell you that in the history of mankind, there have been roughly 15,000 wars, during which 3.5 billion people died. And in the past recorded 5,000 years, people have been able to live in peace only for a negligible 300 years. That means every century, the world lived in peace only 1 week. Only 1 week. I would strongly apologize for technically philosophical term, but we have screwed up with every previous century so far. And what makes us think that things will be different this time? The problem, of course, is much deeper, and is, of course, much more complicated than another crisis. We are going through the crisis which is transformational, and it's a very rare situation. And multilateralism is not the cause, but a victim of the current transformational crisis that we have entered, not with COVID, but many decades ago. The problem is also that the post-Cold War generations have grown in the belief that history has ended before them, that now we live in an era of comfort and stability. And indeed, the post-war situation and context has given birth to beliefs that global solutions could be agreed upon and implemented to tackle global challenges. This proved to be an illusion. Look at United Nations today and Security Council, look at G20, G7, practically any multilateral platform today is having a lot of difficulties. So awakening from this happy slumber to reality was very bitter. The COVID crisis shock reminded us that we live in history and the world is continuously morphing. It's not just changing abruptly and then for 100 years no change. It's morphing continuously all the time. In addition to that, history lives in us, shaping our political views, social attitudes. You will never understand Black Lives Matter movement in the United States if you have not read Faulkner's Sound and Fury, where he looks at present through the prism of three great tragedies of the US history. Faulkner predicted and demonstrated that BLM is nothing more than a delayed reaction to Trump's unconscious revenge for the defeat of the South in the Civil War. The pandemics is not so much a turning point, but a catalyst and activator of what actually has been already going on for decades. The current system and institutions of international cooperation were built to address, in fact, the 19th and 20th century problems. But in today's complex and fast-paced digital world, these structures cannot operate at internet speed. 2,000 years ago, the entire Pax Romana was doomed like a dinosaur whose brain was too small for such a huge body. Our current world system seems to have similar constraints today. We are witnessing a tectonic movement of the international order foundations. It's not possible today just to recapture main elements of the post-1945 international order and recombine them in something more or less sustainable. There is no way to return to the status quo ante, no way to back to normality. the international order premised solely on respect of sovereignty, together with the maintenance of the balance of power necessary to secure it in the forms of unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity, becomes less and less sustainable, and it does not provide necessary security, services, living standards to the people. Why no one can tell what the future order will look like, it is becoming obvious that the new management tools are needed to prevent a situation in which not much will be left to pick up. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I think you've given a very good summation of the of what we've been talking up until now. It's come very powerfully that we cannot judge our institutions today in terms of the challenges today. This is not what they were developed for. In fact, the problems we have are showing in every area of society. The financial system is undergoing tremendous changes, which we've seen because of the developments of technology. Employment is undergoing radical changes. Business is globalizing and having tremendous impact on revenues in the nation states, on relationships between nation states. Our educational system. How far is it able to rise to the occasion of meeting the needs of the 21st century when it was developed at a long time in the past through different approaches? So this gives us a very good idea of where our conversation needs to focus in the next hour. First, I would like to complete our first round of discussion by calling on Peter Roman, former Prime Minister of Romania from 1989 to 1991, who certainly is very conscious of how different the world is today than at the time when he was at a very
right.
history, along with Alexander, when he was right.
You are absolutely right. Thank you, Gary. And since I'm the last one in this round, I can already tell you that the debate was extremely interesting, and I wish to congratulate the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for this opportunity. Now, we certainly differentiate multilateralism from globalism, although sometimes there is some kind of confusion. In fact, multilateralism, it's more or less about the world economic, new world order, while globalism, it's about communication and economy. The new world order, based on a multilateralist approach, never reached to be a system. It was never really stable. It was not always rational, and intentionally it was not a fair design. Let me introduce two examples. Sometimes examples are, I think, more valuable. Multilateralist approach is certainly about collective political approach, a collective political action. I know one action which was collective and eventually successful because I was involved directly in it. It was in 1999, the NATO collective action against the Milosevic regime, when NATO bombarded some specific institutions related directly to Milosevic regime. And Romania, we joined this action. It was what it was, a bombardment. Eventually it was successful because in 2000, when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, it ended successfully because Milosevic was ousted through free democratic elections through the will of the popular will of the people of Serbia. Then it was still Yugoslavia. It's a very interesting example in if we wish to understand what can be or cannot be a successful or unsuccessful collective political action. Another example is of a totally different kind. I was yesterday reading something which struck me. We all see that if the multilateralist approach in the world today has diminished so much, is reduced to, from many perspectives, is so much reduced. This is due to a surge of populist politicians. I mean, those who are claiming that they represent the nationhood, they promote the national interests, and so they are the heroes of their nations. Okay. But what I've seen yesterday is that a very good example about that. In the European Union, was designed to be an engine, a propeller of prosperity, based on the convergence policies of the European Union. And the figures are the following. For Romania, at the beginning of the millennium, in the year 2000, the GDP per capita in Romania was only 7% of the same GDP per capita in Germany. In 2018, so mainly 18, 19 years after that, the GDP per capita of Romania was already 26% of the GDP in Germany. Now, the same for Italy. At the beginning of the millennium, the GDP per capita in Italy was 20% less than in Germany. But in 2018, it was 40% less. In Romania, we do not, fortunately, we do not have a strong populistic movement. In Italy, obviously, Italians are asking themselves, to what benefit are we in the European Union if in more or less 20 years we have lost so much with respect, for instance, to Germany? And the populist movements in Italy are very, very strong. The classic parties are reduced to much less than they were before. This is to say that these events are strongly intertwined. I mean, multilateralism and globalism, in the end, are strongly impacted by what happens in the political sphere, obviously. And we see that today, which is prevailing more, even if we are under the urgency of a common purpose, for instance, to mitigate, to reduce the impact of the planet warming, still the political sphere, the political attitudes, the political leaders are impacting more. I think that we are at a point where we have to be aware that we arduously wish to do something which is impossible to do if we are not able, if we do not seek to establish some kind of useful compromise instead of a global integral strategy, which seems to be less and less workable in our days. I'm speaking also from the point of view not only as a politician, but as a scientist. I'm a scientist in the field of environment in fluid of physics. My important field is about the unpredictability of the natural and economic events. We are yet not capable of formulating clearly the impact of those critical thresholds. We are probably moving in terms of the climate change to a critical threshold. After that, the change could be radical, of course, in negative terms could be radical, downing the path of that impact. And that should be understood by the whole humanity. We do not yet have clearly, and it's not always the fault of the political leaders. If a political leader is not capable of explaining himself clearly, those who are the analysts, political analysts, the experts, which are advising them and the whole world, they also they are either not capable of explaining themselves clearly. The common purpose, the beautiful idea of a common destiny, in the case of the climate change, in the case of related to that, to mass migration, if that kind of political threshold I just mentioned, occurs, we will face with a huge mass migration, millions and millions of people who are losing their homes, are losing their jobs, and of course, the only thing they can do is to migrate. So I am trying to tell that we have to be stronger, we have to be more intelligent, we have to be more tenacious than those who deny what it is our common purpose.
Peter, thank you very much. We'll come back and give you another opportunity to elaborate on how you think we can do that, because you've made a very important contribution to it by looking at it from the perspective of science and the challenges we face. And I think that...
Gary, I just intervene a second. I'm not able to stay up to the end because they just told me that I have an electoral meeting. We are heading to elections here. If I can speak again and probably less in 10 or 15 minutes, that would be right, if it's possible. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Very interesting, very important. Now I'd like to shift the format a little and shift the question a little. We've spent a very rich time looking at the reasons for the current dilemma, the fundamental changes in the world system, in the structure, in society, in the pace of change at the national, at the local, at the global level. And now let's look beyond that to how do we respond to this? I know we cannot do in a discussion like this justice to the complexity of the issues. We've identified them. But let's look forward also and say, what are the possibilities? What are the options? What are the areas where we can focus, where we should be focusing in future? And just to alert you so that we will come back to the issue of the role of non-state actors and non-institutional organizations, international organizations as well, because the issue of multilateral relations is no longer just confined to nation states or to international organizations as it was more simplistically in the past. So I'd like to take, first of all, what can we do at the level of the nation state, at the level of the international organizations, and then we'll close by asking, what about all the other players? What about all the other stakeholders? What are the opportunities there? So the format now is I'd like to take on individually who would like to speak and who would like to speak first, and we'll break the order, and those who we'll have 2 questions, and you can choose which one you would prefer to focus on, because we probably don't have time for 2 rounds more. So who would like to start out? Where do we make a beginning? Phoebe. Was that Roshan? Were you?
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Roshan. Please go ahead. I'll wait.
After you.
Roshan, and I was particularly waiting for you on the other stakeholders in the civil society, because you're such a wonderful example of what can be done by others. But you please go ahead, Roshan.
Kobe, you can go ahead. Gender equality. Hope that.
Okay, I'll go ahead and then you come in. I totally agree with the Prime Minister of Romania. We don't know yet enough. There is not just a risk, there is ambiguity. And I'm going to talk about the relationship between planet and people. That is one existential crisis that probably caused the COVID crisis, but is also putting the whole multilateral, but also national order into question. We are faced with ambiguity. That is, we don't even know the probabilities of the different possible events, let alone the thresholds with regards to climate change. So we are faced with a situation, at least with regards to climate change, that human history has not recorded such ambiguity with regards to the natural existence of the planet and the ability basically of people to live in this planet. So let me elaborate a bit on this and build our way forward by focusing on this relationship. This climate emergency and the need to limit global warming to plus 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which the risk of droughts and floods and extreme heat and poverty for hundreds of millions of people will significantly increase. At the moment, UNEP emissions gap report indicates that we need to reduce global emissions by 7.6% per year. This is a cut of 68% by 2030. And one cannot help but wonder why COVID response was so immediate, at least the first national response was so immediate in each and every state compared to the response to climate change. Climate change can end up killing more than COVID, but of course the deaths are hidden in the jargon as increased frequency and severity of natural disasters. And there is intense scientific population that deforestation and biodiversity loss due to mismanagement of the planet and due to the effects of climate change have driven wild animals closer to human populations and increased the likelihood of zoonotic viruses making the cross-species live. And this is going to continue to be the case if we don't tackle climate change. The IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change report, has warned that global warming will accelerate the emergence of new viruses. So we need effective policies for climate change. And because climate change is a public bad, we need multilateral collaboration. Unilateral national policy decisions will never be enough. And because of that, it is quite important to understand that the level and speed of the change needed to successfully tackle climate crisis that includes the financial crisis and the economic crisis that was caused by COVID. So COVID is a problem, but the economic, financial, and social crisis that it has brought is a bigger problem. And climate change is even a bigger problem because it causes economic, financial, health, social crisis. So timing is important. The level and speed of the change needed to successfully tackle these three crises at the time is unprecedented, and incremental changes will not be enough. What we have, I'm an optimistic person. And I will refer only to very recent history. Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, the European Green Deal. European Green Deal, at least for Europe, is very crucial because it is a growth policy, because it focuses on developing our strengths and making an inclusive, providing a pathway for inclusive growth, leaving no one behind, making Europe a leader in clean technology, protecting the environment, and becoming climate neutral by 2050. And there is a financial package to support that. There is also the climate pact to support that. The climate pact is the big agreement between the leadership and the people, the stakeholders, businesses, civil society, policymaking, politicians, the youth, everybody to support this transformation. And just after the European Green Deal, we had this coronavirus. And now with the coronavirus, we see again that all the member states, with difficulty, I'm not saying easily, have now put an additional 750 billion to support the recovery. What kind of recovery do we need? We need a recovery that is green. We need to get the relationship, the interaction between people and planet right. And green recovery means that we are investing in green technology. We are investing in circular economy. We are investing in energy efficiency. We are investing in regenerating agriculture. We invest in food security and smart agriculture, promote supply chain, promote secure ICT networks, and of course, control the epidemic, promote research that can produce the vaccine and the cure, and also promote security, safe travel, safe trade. All this to be achievable, we need to provide education, training, and capacity building. It's not just a reinvestment exercise. It's an exercise that needs to re-educate the people and get them on the correct transition pathway. And this is one big project that we are working now with Jeff Sachs, trying to construct innovation and portfolio, budgetary portfolio pathways that will allow Europe to make this transition. Allowing innovation and financing the pathway to the transition means that it is a very inclusive process. We need to get everybody involved in a process of co-understanding the problem, co-understanding the possible solutions, co-designing the future vision, because it's their vision. They need to become owners of their vision, and then co-designing the pathways towards their vision. I'm gonna close in 1 minute by reporting on yesterday's announcement. Yesterday, we have announced as UNSDSN the results of the global report on achieving the SDGs. The highest priority of every government must remain the suppression of the pandemic, first finding. Second finding, COVID has a short-term negative impact on most SDGs, but these impacts are amplified for the most vulnerable groups. Third, SDGs and the 6 transformation pathways, that is education, health and well-being, decarbonization, sustainable use of water and land and oceans, sustainable community, and sustainable use of digitalization can help build back better, greener, fairer, and more resilient. Countries in Asia Pacific have progressed most on SDG achievement. Rich countries generate negative spillovers that undermine other countries' ability to meet the SDGs, and there is an urgent need for more, not less, more global partnerships and collaboration. I will stop here.
Phoebe, that was fabulous, and I would love to go on because you have everything you said was so relevant, and you've really painted the picture, not of the challenges of the past, but what are we grappling with today, and then what are the institutions we need and the coordination we need to do it effectively. Thank you so much. Peter, because you said you had to go, Robshan has nicely considerately deferred his comments so we could hear from you. Please unmute.
Okay, because I know that the time is running, that everyone is going to need to speak, like, for the last time moment, but I will just, we had lots of meetings, like, online conferences, discussions, and listening from different number of, like, eminent peoples. There's lots of concerns because pandemic it's something like, multilateralism is not the case that we are now started concerning about this. There has been a threat about the multilateralism long ago. It's like, they've been in American society, they've been like, diversity, like they've been like, different societies, like which was supporting like, white nationalists and Black Lives Matters and so on. And this was like, the things that President Trump just built up his campaign on that. And the United Nations today, David may like, agree or not, the United Nations is undermined today. There is no, like what we've been discussing all these times, you can't accept and you can't demand anything from Secretary General of UN when you don't give him a power. Because there is a Security Council which blocks every decision he makes. I mean, there is a like, simple way ceasefire agreement. It was like, simplest way because like a call, a solidarity. The Security Council didn't agree on that. Even they didn't come together like, to discuss that. And dozen other things like, and we have to accept that the world order is changed. We don't have the same world order like Henry Kissinger's book. We have a new world order, and we don't know which kind of new world order it's going to be. And I think that it's up to us as an international organization, as intellectuals, as an organizations to be able to start thinking about what we are going to do with the world. Because without leadership, no one is going to lead up. Yes, big countries like United States of America today, when I was reading today in the morning by CNN, there was a nice article I was telling to Prime Minister Petroman. They were mentioning that the country which was flying to moon, today they can't fly to Paris because they are infected personalities, infected people, nation, or something like that. And when the president doesn't accept the things that, which is a normal way. And we have to understand that there is a populism. Populism is growing more and more in Europe also. Europe is not a perfect place as well. I mean, like our part of the world as well. But the way, what we have to do and how we have to change the leadership, and I think that it's our mission and it's our responsibility. It's a big mistake how we treated the Paris Agreement. Because I just will quote from Mohammed Yunus. He just at the last meeting, he said that if we fail to undertake a social and environmental consensuses driven post-corona program, we will be heading for a catastrophe that it's many times worse than corona brought in. We can hide in our homes from coronavirus, but if we fail to address deteriorating global issues, we'll not be able to have any places to run out. And every single, like we had with Gary, with President Fakim, with President Yosipovich, Prime Minister, and Prime Minister Petroman, we sent 8 or 9 statements or calls to the Secretary General of UN, to G20, to all country head of states. I mean, thanks God, at least we are having a response from the number of countries. Now today I was recalled, we received 20 messages from the current presidents that they are supporting the messages what we are doing. But we have to join our common efforts together. And as Helen Clark said very nicely, that every voice matters. And we have to join our voices. On Monday, we will join with Gary and Phoebe together, to discuss about, because we are going, it's the first time, I hope, we are going to bring all the international organizations, CEOs and Secretary Generals together in order to discuss what we wanted to do and what we can do together in the way to the UN General Assembly. Thank you, Gary. I will stop from here, everyone, to have a speak.
Thank you.
Can I just say a few words, because I will have to leave as well soon.
Amina,
may I?
and right after Peter, because we promised him, and then
Okay.
Peter, please go ahead. You have to unmute, please. Unmute your mic, Peter.
I said I'm very short. To put it plainly, a good multilateralism today would be about to have vaccine against COVID to all people and free, while globalism would be much more about profits. And that precisely, it's the big issue. How to cope with the reality in which, as I said somewhere, the cost of doing big business is too often associated with hostility to collective action. And my guess right now is that we should really try to establish a world civil network for a common purpose, for a common good, with the many millions of people in there, which could, in fact, make those big businesses to understand that they have no other choice than to join the common purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us. Sorry you couldn't stay longer, but
thank you. Thank you.
Hope the elections go well.
Okay.
Amina?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gary. I think I'll just follow on to what Rovshan has said. I think we all agree that the multilateral system has important strength. And I think we have an opportunity here in the context of the UN 75th anniversary for a grand consultation on the future of multilateralism. And I think what COVID has done, it's hijacked the global agenda, but I think it has also created many opportunities. So rather than destroy the system, the upheaval could spur countries into strengthening it. So that will require planning for the future while tackling the crisis of the present. And today's leaders, I think, need to emulate what their predecessors have achieved magnificently in 1945. And so again, to cite Mr. Guterres, and I think has been rightly said, I think he has tried to break down the silos and improve coordination. But the pandemic has shown the need for greater and stronger form of governance. And he believes, what he says also, and I quote him, today we have a multilateralism that has no teeth, he says. And whenever there are teeth, as in the Security Council, there is no appetite to bite. And so multilateralism needs to evolve in two ways, he argues. And he said that we must become more networked, precisely as the previous speaker has said. It needs to be more inclusive. And by network, he means working closely with the other organization to achieve joint up action on interconnected issues affecting specific regional problems. I'll just quickly here, just take back again to the African continent. Let's take the Sahel, for example. There has been no single organization that can tackle its crisis, its intertwined security, development, and political troubles. And this is where, again, collaboration is needed with, again, the big organization called the African Union, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and other institutions. So here, the UN's cooperation is with the AU in this, again, which has been fantastic in all areas, as Mr. Guterres has said. And again, with the World Bank and the IMF, it should be deeper than ever. So he has reckoned that this side of things is on track, but inclusivity is not. So national government that control multilateral organizations, because I said earlier on, multilateral organizations are what countries and institutions make of them. So the national governments have resisted letting business, trade union, non-state actors to have a voice. And I think that the UN, I think, has this great opportunity now at this milestone anniversary that we have to make a campaign again to open up global governance. So I think this is what we have to keep on pushing. And what we have done, what has been done recently to the WHO is not the way forward. We can blame game afterwards, but right in the crisis, we should be supporting institutions like this. So I think the future of multilateralism, contrary to some naysayers, personally, I think it's there, it is for the common good. But again, it's what we make of these organizations, us, men, women, countries, institutions together, because at the end of the day, they're all country, their states, their membership, of course, all the countries in this world. So let us make it work. Let us be proud of the institution that we're going to make through these multilateral organizations. So that's what I have to say. Roshan, I will have to take leave because I have another meeting in a few minutes. Thank you again for this great opportunity. Thank you.
Jan first and then Eva. Jan, please. Thank you, Amina.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Just to be very brief and just to drop some words. Introducing this second round of our panel after the fascinating debate which we have gone through in the first round, which was very educative, fascinating. You used the words, among others, what's the role of stakeholders of the processes on the international and national level as well? Who are they? What's their role? What's their importance? What are the changes in their behaving? It leads me to the, could be said, contemplation about the state of the democracy in our countries, namely in Europe anyway, namely in Europe. The first thing is that democracy is not, it's not self-evident. It's not self-evident issue. The question is, do we have in current time the, let's say, full democracy, or is it some democracy which is reduced to its preconditions, prerequisites, or assumptions anyway? Voting, elections, structure of the political system, some division of power between justice, government, presidents, parliaments, and so on and so forth. But I'm afraid, and that's my concern about the current state of democracy, I'm afraid that there are some signs of declining of democracy, or eroding democracy, or weakening of democracy, having on mind that what the current politicians and leaders are doing, that they are limiting the playground of politics just for, let's say, for themselves, for politicians, other politicians, political parties. But a full democracy cannot be, let's say, cannot be functional and efficient, or effective and transparent if you don't allow another stakeholders to come, to bring them to the playground. I mean, namely the NGOs, what kind of interactions between power and NGOs do we have on national and as well as on international level? That's really serious, because as I see that in many countries the role of NGOs is rather suppressed than supported. The interactions between power and them is weakening anyway. And it, let's say, it makes the politicians to have the more appetite to, let's say, to use or disuse the playground they play just for them. What we need is the permanent control what politicians and leaders are doing, and never to resign on this role. Because if we start to resign to this role of controlling and discussing and so on. The role of media was mentioned in the first round, and social networking. This is extremely powerful, extremely strong, extremely dangerous anyway, that we see as looking at the faking news spread in the space and so. So what I wanted to say is my, let's say, concern on the state of democracies in the world, in Europe, in the US, and that's typical for our debate here. That what we have debated was could be said, governmental international organizations, Bretton Woods institutions, United Nations, European Union, OECD, but just in this round of, and I am very happy that the new stakeholders were introduced, like NGOs on the international and national level, their role, their support, their, let's say, importance. That's something what we actually need to have to take into account. So that's, I wanted to add to this debate, speaking about the role of the stakeholders. What we are missing in this debate, but sometimes later on, what's the role of business, by the way, of the private sector in transforming the societies and the internet in global economy? What's the role of business? What's the role of business? We have been talking about the states, about the governments. But the role of private sector and state of the private sector, and whether it is health or crippled or troubles and so on, that's very influencing the standard of living and so on and so forth. So the debate on the stakeholders, or the introducing the stakeholders, brought me to this question on the state of the democracy. Repeating, it's not self-evident, and we cannot afford to look just to be blind, to look as that the democracy is undermined or something is happening with that, and we cannot afford to be blind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I think it's so important. It's worthy of, I had put it as a question here, but we won't do justice to it today. It's worth having a separate program just discussion on that, because it's so important. And there are other stakeholders. Alexander mentioned in his paper subnational structures, interparliamentary unions, megacities, multinational corporations, pressure groups, scientific institutions. and they all are playing an increasing role, and we need them. But how do they fit into this? Neither the nation states or especially are not quite sure how to deal with them, but the whole organization isn't. So they've got to be part of the solution. Our megacities are an example where we had 7,000 major cities in the world coming together to embrace stricter environmental regulations than their national governments, because they are more committed, more close to the people, and realize the challenges even more than at the leadership at the political top. So these are complex issues, but maybe also part of the solution. Thank you so much, Jan. Ivo.
Oh, definitely our group can be called Friends of Multilateralism. And I think it shows the tendency of our thinking. So, but how I understand multilateralism? I understand it as democracy on global level. Democracy means will to harmonize interests. Unilateralism is not willing to harmonize interests, just to fulfill our separate interests. And that was a very important question. What can we do? We've, of course, understood that we cannot implement or generate some leaders promoting multilateralism or democracy, but organizations like Nizami Ganjari or some NGOs on local level can be very helpful to modify public opinion and political scene, not only in particular country, but on global level as well. Of course, when we gather together and we have this kind of conversation, we can ask ourselves, so is it really some effect of our discussion? Do we really influence something or someone to change opinion? But I'm not pessimist. I think that discussion like this are small stones being put into mosaic, big mosaic of social activities that form political opinion, not only on local level, but on global level as well. So that is the reason I'm so grateful to Nizami Ganjari to enable the floor like this to express political opinions, social opinions, and to promote them, not only through our discussions, but also by interaction between different organizations like Nizami Ganjari, Club of Rome, Club of Madrid, or some other important organizations. So I hope that we are going to have more and more possibilities to have floors like this. Rosha, thank you very much. Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivo. Thank you. I second and triply support all that you said, and hats off and thanks to NGIC for what they've done. Alexander, David, would you like to, I would love to hear further from you if you would have further thoughts to contribute. Now, I know we have gone the 2 hours, but still the discussion, what would you like to, how would you like to go forward?
I go by the adage, age before beauty, so I let Alexander go first.
Gary, thank you very much. I do not insist, but if we have some time, I would be glad to use 5 minutes or less, even less, much less.
Definitely have time, please.
Okay, okay. Well, you know, I think that all of us here are friends of multilateralism. We are concerned with the fate of multilateralism, and that's why we are here. We have different views on the future of multilateralism. For me, multilateralism should be transformed very deeply and very much. There are, figuratively speaking, today we have absolutely three, let me say, 3D system of politics, of global politics. And We have already the new actors that are entering the politics. The state maintains absolutely no doubt about it, a monopoly on certain policies areas. But non-state actors play an increasingly important role on defining the problems links, shaping political discourse. Danish government recently established a post of the ambassador responsible for relationship with Apple, Microsoft corporations, and Google as well. The French follow suit with this just last year. Big companies have already assumed many functions that previously were associated with the states. From cartography, today it's Google, to surveillance, it's also Google today. It's not anymore state as much as one would expect. Facebook. You know, people today engage in social issues mainly through civil society, and I agree with the question mark about the future of democracy, because all that changes the prospects of democracy, which has evolved during 2,000 years since it was, let me say, invented in ancient Greece. But the situation undermines the nation-based representative model of democracy, which we are talking about today. Is it good or bad? Probably there are something good, there are bad things, but you mentioned the role of megacities. Yes, indeed, more than that. The contours of this trend have already materialized in the recent legal claims against sovereign state, China, filed by the region, by the states of Missouri and Mississippi. It has never happened before. You know, some of the world's megacities today, already in size, in population terms, are of medium-sized countries. Cities are economic and political powerhouses today. The GDP of the state of New York is larger than that of Spain or South Korea. In Latin America, Sao Paulo state alone is richer than Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia combined. Guangdong province in China is wealthier than Russia or Mexico. Country as the only structure in the multilateral system is dying. After 50 years, instead of maybe 218 countries of today, there will be 500 or 600 cities. It will take a little time, and no one except the journalists will remember about the meetings of Trump and Xi and the trade war that followed, nor about the APEC meetings and their impact on the price of oil, if oil will be at that time still usable, nor about China's security law in Hong Kong, neither about, you know, crisis or any crisis in Brasilia, or about Brazilian president. A little later, by the standards of history, in about 30, 50 years from now, the teenagers will be surprised to ask, having met in the textbook with unfamiliar words, what is Brexit? What? Hong Kong lost its autonomy in 2020. Are you kidding? There were really two Koreas. Putin was before Lenin or after. Of course, if he ceases to be the president by that time after yesterday's constitutional amendments. Let me stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. David, would you like to follow?
Are you going to add any injury time, or do I have to do an acrobatic feat and say something in a minute and a half?
No, you.
Look, let me just.
Patient. So you have
just
time.
two things. One, in your write-up of your first question, you pointed out at the end of the Cold War, we missed an unprecedented opportunity to shift the paradigm from competitive to inclusive cooperative security at the global level. I think that is absolutely right. That could have been the question. I believe there were a number of reasons, a lot of them, as we say, objective, some subjective. However, that was a missed opportunity. It was a time when Russia was saying, hey, fellas, I'm no longer a Rottweiler. I'm a nice little beagle puppy, and I want to be everybody's friend. However, in order to go there, the only standing superpower needed to change its own thinking. And that thinking was some sort of admittance to a level comparative with. And that has a long-standing history. And I totally disagree with Alexander's wonderfully high evaluation of journalistic historical thought. Journalists will forget. It'll be the historians who will ask those questions. Journalists forget the word parity that the Soviets were so focused on. And that was their transition to great power status, parity, which the United States never entirely gave them. So this was the same thing. Russia didn't get the time of day, and there were issues. That was one reason. The other reason was that all the former Warsaw Pact countries ran, screaming bloody murder away from the Russians. So did the republics. However, not all the republics were accepted into the fold. And the darling of Washington at the time, Yeltsin, let's not forget, again, historians forget, it was Yeltsin on his watch and on the watch of his lieutenants that Georgia was mauled, Abkhazia was torn away, Ossetia was torn away. In the Karabakh conflict, there was a very one-sided approach, and Moldova happened. So all that happened on that watch. And the other thing was, of course, that the national security state needed to have a focus on somebody, on something. And with that out of the way, what was in crisis was not the UN. What is in crisis is the post-war world.
Yes.
And what is being done now is everybody's looking to how to conserve that world. However, we now have Russia as a hostile entity which only has its nuclear weapons and its permanent seat in the Security Council going for it. It has no economy to speak of. So and it has a boiling social problem with regard to longevity and addictions and whatnot. You've got China that now has a US-sized budget and economy, but is militarily inferior. And you've got the United States that is both militarily and economically on top. However, it has also developed a social problem with what we're seeing now. So this brings me to what my boss, our colleague here, the former president of Mauritius, quoted profusely. In the UN, we don't name countries, we name problems. But in this situation, the Secretary General talked about the triangle of the quote-unquote top countries and the deeply, deeply dysfunctional relationships between them. And that is what has created a problem. And that brings me to my last point, multilateralism. Multilateralism is a notion, it's a mindset, it's a tool. But it needs political will to work through multilateralism. That's the issue. Let me give you a very simple, small example. We have multilateral institutions that don't work. We have the Conference on Disarmament, 64 member states, but they haven't been able to even agree on a program of work for 22 years. Why? Because there's no will to do that. So, and the very last point, looking to WHO to lead in practical terms the combating of a pandemic is akin to asking the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome to deliver flour and fortified biscuits to refugee camps. And that brings me to my final point with which I started, that the UN system needs reforming. You can't have UNDP in the development system and have the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. I'm sorry, what does it do? They're all my colleagues in Vienna, but you know, there's got to be coherence. And if I may abuse your kindness, one last thing. We talked about silos, about the UN being in silos. The silos start in the capitals of the member states. And that is especially visible in Geneva, where we have any number from 6 to 12 foreign policies coming every time there's a conference. We have the foreign policy of the ministries of health, of labor, of telecommunications, etc., etc. Because no minister of labor or health is going to send his remit before going to Geneva to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of his country and say, "Can you take a look? Does this conform with what our policies are?" They will bring their own thing, and they also bring their own money because the finance ministry has already given them money. This is how the silos occur. Sorry, I can go on till the cows come home. Thank you.
Then I wish the cows don't come home for a long time. David, that was really interesting. You've raised so many important points and given us a greater insight into it. And all of this, I hope we can pursue in further discussions in NGIC and also in the World Academy, because these are critical issues that for further discussion. I know we have gone late. I would just like to ask Phoebe, you're working in you're working at different levels and scales, but you're intensely, you gave us a beautiful brief summary of what's going on in Europe. But in terms of just to come back to the issue of multilateralism, you see what Europe is trying to do, and it's the most integrated, the most organized for multilateral cooperation. What kind of insights can we draw about, if we're to grapple with issues at the global level, the direction we would need to move in, based on what you're seeing?
Yes. Europe is small. It's so small. It is, of course, currently a leader in terms of truly investing in identifying a multilateral way forward. But it's so much easier for Europe because it's so small. And it has a history of strong institutions, at least Northern Europe. So what I see is, what I find important is first transparency, clarity, and institutional structure. The institutions are very important. Then willingness to be science-driven. Then willingness to engage the society. And when I'm talking about society, I mean everybody. The politicians as well. It's just part of the society. The politicians, policy making, the businesses, the trade unions, the civil society, NGOs, youth. Now in Europe we have this holistic approach to integrating everybody in this co-design of our common future, which is called systems innovation approach. The idea is that we are reaching a situation that needs incremental change, even exponential change. And in order to achieve that, technology is important, the funds are important, but we need to engage people in the co-design of this change. And I've worked on projects in all 5 continents, and this is the same for all continents. Either you're talking about Europe or Africa, unless you understand the problem with the stakeholders, understand their point of view. And when I say stakeholder, these are all different groups. Unless you understand the problem with them and co-design the solution with them, your solution will never be implemented, never. At the village scale, at the national scale, at the multinational scale. You need to get them all involved, make them co-owners, make them believe that you understand them, you understand their needs, their aspirations, their worries and insecurities about the future, and engage them in this co-designing process. A crucial element in this co-design is knowledge, information, education, training. We need capacity building in order to make each and every one owner of the co-designed solutions. I believe Europe is trying to do that because this is the way we understand, I think, democracy. This is the way we understand the concept of using the power of people combined with the scientific results in order to sketch our pathway to the future. I will stop here, but because I talk too much always. But I think it's this difference that I find in Europe that I don't find in any other places that is making Europe a leader in the climate change struggle, in the struggle trying to recover from COVID, and also trying to help the difficulties with the financial crisis, because the financial crisis might be over, let's say globally, but you know, debt, public debt is huge all around the world. So it's about this co-design of the solution. And of course, co-design means solidarity. Yeah? And I come from Greece. So we've struggled in order to prove that solidarity is important, not just for the weak, but also for the strong. I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, for all your contributions, and to all of you. Been wonderful group, very rich discussion. And I hope we have another opportunity, Rovshan, to continue this and go further in it. We've raised much more questions than we have solved, but that was the inevitable and I think a good step forward. Rovshan, thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
I see for taking this initiative, the wonderful initiatives you are taking as an NGO to show us what civil society can do to contribute. This is really essential contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and actually looking forward to see you on Monday, because it will be for the first time that almost all major international organizations, CEOs and head of the organizations is going together in order to discuss how we can just partner in the framework of the UN General Assembly. That's why I'm looking to see you, Gary and Phoebe, on Monday.
Thank you so much.
Discussions.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Glad
Thank
you could.
you, Gary, for a wonderful moderation. Thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful
Nice.
that I did.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.